I guess people are trickling in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm Amal Andraus. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. I'm really thrilled to have all of you with us today. Of course, wishing we could be in person in our beautiful space and hoping very much that we will be increasingly through the summer, and certainly with the goal of being as in person as possible in the fall. Today we will be, I hope you've had a chance to watch the general open house for the school, which gives you a sense of the breadth of what we do here. And today I really will be focusing on the Master of Architecture and as well as touching on the AAD programs. I'm joined by our amazing faculty, and so they're dispersed amongst you on the grid, but I'd like to first kind of introduce them, and maybe they can just raise their hands as I do so. Lola Benalon, who's the assistant professor and sequence director of the Building Science Technology of the M.Arch program, also the director of the Natural Materials Research Group, is with us today. Amina Blacksher. Amina, welcome, who is an adjunct assistant professor, currently teaching both Core 2 and Advanced 4 studios. Erica Getz. Is Erica here? I can't see her, but Erica is also an assistant professor who coordinates Core 2 and currently teaching Core 2. Mario Gooden. Hi, Mario. Mario is an associate professor of professional practice and directing the Advanced Studios this year. And he is also the co-director of the Global Africa Lab with Mabel Wilson. Jerome Hafford, teaching Advanced 4 studio, adjunct assistant professor. Juan Herreros, I saw Juan, he's there, professor of professional practice, currently teaching Advanced 6 studios. Zia Jamaluddin, who coordinates Advanced 4 studio and is assistant professor. Andres Haki. Hi, Andres. Andres directs, of course, the AAD program and is a professor of practice, and you will be speaking with him directly, I think, tomorrow for AAD students, and he'll zoom in more directly on the AAD specificities. Reinhold Martin, professor and director of the history theory sequence of the M.Arch, and as well as director of the Temple Hohenbuhl Center for the Study of American Architecture. Justin Garrett Moore is joining us, I hear, from Rwanda today, or are you back?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, from
Justin.
Kigali. Hello.
Amazing. Thank you, Justin. Justin is a very well-known alum, a fantastic teacher who has been teaching both in the urban design and now in the architecture program, currently teaching a studio in Advanced 6. Welcome, Justin. Anna Pujaner. Hi, Anna. Are you in New York or?
Yes, I'm in New York.
Oh, great. Anna goes back and forth between Madrid and New York, and we're very lucky to have her. And she is currently both the coordinator of Core 1 studios as well as currently teaching Advanced 6 studio, professor of practice. Hilary Sample is either here or will be joining, leads the Core studios and is the IDC professor of housing design. Galia Solomonov from her office in New York, just wonderful practicing architect and a professor of practice, currently teaching Advanced 6 studio. And I think that's it for our faculty. So did I miss anyone? No. Okay.
Laura.
Oh,
Yeah.
Laura, sorry. Laura is also a very illustrious professor who directs the Center for Spatial Research and also coordinates the visual studies sequence, as well as teaching advanced studios and seminars. So you will have a chance to sort of ask questions, and at the end of my hopefully not too long presentation, and I will kind of direct your chats to everyone that is with me today, and we'll try to answer as much as possible. If we don't get to all of your questions, the admissions office, whom I know you've been in touch with, as well as Danielle Smaller, Stefan Budeker, and Kevin Smith will answer any remaining questions as much as possible. So, Columbia GSAP. We are now caught between the physical space of our beloved Avery Hall, designed by McKim, Mead and White, which I hope I will be able to welcome all of you in. And of course, the virtual space that we are still constructing. This was the Minecraft model made last year, which, as you can see, needs a lot of help. So this moment of kind of going back and forth between the virtual and the physical, I think is both a very difficult and incredible moment. And so this presentation will kind of weave together both kind of conditions, and hopefully we can ask what comes next when we all come back together. But I like to think that the school and the architecture programs are very much about scales of engagement with the issues of our time, from the kind of smallest scale of rethinking questions of materials and embodied energy, to the large territorial scales of resources, extraction, water systems, etc. And as I showed in the kind of bigger open house presentation, it's really a conversation between pedagogy and thinking about curriculum, what we teach, how we come together, research, both the research of our faculty, but also your own research in studio and across all of your courses, and then thinking about how to reinvent practice, how to reinvent new forms of engagement. There are many ideas and many issues we are dealing with. I would say at this moment, the three kind of urgent issues that are intersecting and also being examined separately are the issue of climate change, the issue of equity, racial, social, ethnic, gender, across all of the scales of the built environment, and certainly across the practices of architecture. And these kind of issues, these three issues, transpire through all of our work, whether it's the work of our students, rethinking energy and models of construction, and to the work that is being done in studio with emphasis on climate change that over the past years has been recognized by the Buell Center Paris Prize Award, which recognizes studio work that addresses the 2015 Paris Accords, to our faculty's own research, such as David Benjamin's research on the question of embodied energy, and to issues of equity. I hope you will have had a chance to look at our GSAP Anti-Racism Action Plan. You will be the class that will experience some of its very most important implemented actions, such as the Common Circle course, orientation course, which will happen in fall and bring all of the school together to think about these issues, among many other sort of actions that we have been taking, and that has really sort of transpired across all of the dimensions of the schools, from events on rethink planning practices, to thinking about Columbia itself and its neighborhood, Harlem, the Bronx, etc., and its kind of position of, let's say, occupation, and how we can start to repair that relationship. Malu Hudson here on your upper left is one of the co-chairs of the GSAP Faculty Anti-Racism Task Force that is featured in part of the action plan, to the research of our own faculty, such as that of Laura Kurgan and the Center for Spatial Research, looking at issues of care in the built environment, or the Housing Lab that has been tracing, which is student run and has been tracing sort of issues of segregation that have been implemented, almost across all of the history of housing in the US in the built environment, and how that relationship between research, for example, in the Housing Lab, and then what you do as students in the Housing Studio is a kind of feedback loop where your own research and learning how to practice and the faculty research creates a kind of feedback loop, supporting faculty, supporting new faculty that sort of advances and opens up questions about Blackness and architecture in America, such as the work of our new faculty who will start on July 1st, Emmanuel Admasu, featured as part of the Reconstructions show at MoMA, which was co-curated by Professor Mabel Wilson. I hope you will be here tonight to hear Mabel's lecture. And to conversations that are occurring both across studio. This is Mario Gooden's sort of series on learning whiteness that has been the focus of the advanced studio this semester, and certainly will continue as you join us next year. And even bringing this conversation to issues of professional practice. This is a conversation by Robert Herman, who is opening up how we practice more ethically today in the US and around the world. The question of being critical about data and the data visualization and data in the built environment is something that also transpires across all of the dimensions of the school and certainly across the architecture programs. If you're interested, you can go check out the GSAP Skills Trail, which is both very much skills, as the name suggests, and tools based, but also has a kind of critical dimension that is being that invites all of us to embrace as we look at these issues of tools and skills and data in the built environment. This kind of cuts across coursework in the visual sequence studies, both in architecture and in AAD, and really also connects to kind of come back to the natural material world, connects the virtual and the physical, and ask questions about technology and making and construction as we do in our maker space every day, finding ways to make things that are contributing to kind of coming together in a better way in the world. And as many of the schools of architecture last summer, our shop also made masks and shields and is now really, as a result, part of a large network on campus and in New York of maker spaces. All of these issues and ideas sort of infiltrate not just the curriculum, but school life and school culture, both the culture that is produced through very extensive public programming. I hope you will have had a chance to look at our archive of recent and past events, but also kind of bringing those sort of conversations out on campus, a beautiful campus, a very urban campus in the middle of New York, but that is also kind of has the qualities of the American campus, sort of slightly compressed, and then going out into the city. New York is very much both our home and our continued space of exploration and questioning. Student life is also increasingly part of this vibrant culture of questioning, of engagement that the school sort of fosters and kind of believes in. Every year we seem to launch one or more student organizations, and they increasingly are holding events and contributing very, very lively to the life of the school. This was on the occasion of the MoMA show. The Black Reconstruction Collective was invited by the Black Student Alliance at GSAP, and just really powerful conversation about Black architecture, Blackness in the built environment, and how we need to really kind of open up these issues much more critically and forcefully at this moment. And I highly encourage you to watch the event if you haven't already. And from your time as student and student life, these conversations extend to alumni life, and you can also engage with recent alumni conversations and the alumni board's kind of recent reorientation to align more with the school's commitment to these questions and issues. So how do these kind of large questions sort of come to be in very specific ways in the curriculum as you go through either the 3-year M.Arch program or the 3-semester AAD program? The M.Arch and the AAD, as you know, meet up in the last year, and they kind of revive each other with what they've learned and sort of create new opportunities as they intersect in their last year. But first, if you think about the M.Arch curriculum sort of as a series of what we call sequences, the design studio, technology, the visual studies sequence, the history theory sequence, and the professional practice, as well as electives, how do all these things sort of intersect? Well, what we like to think is that at the school, the core is really about core questions and questioning the core, questioning fundamentals or things that we take as fundamentals. And then in this latter part, the 3 other semesters, it's really about assembling positions through design, through thinking, and your own positions in this kind of moment of this kind of second half of your time at GSAP if you're an M.Arch. But what is also interesting is that, as you will see, we have these sequence directors, and the idea is that each sequence does have a very strong identity, a strong position in itself, and students are invited to kind of trace their own trajectory and assemble their position through the ways in which they assemble the courses that they take. So there is a kind of great agency of students to sort of almost design their own trajectory within these values and questions that I think we share now at the school. If starting with alphabetically, starting with the building technology sequence, was very much invested in looking at issues of embodied energy, questioning the materials we use, questioning issues of labor. So we really don't understand technology just as a kind of bells and whistles and sort of a belief in engineering that is going to save the world, even though we certainly do need engineering and technology, but really center technology on these issues of climate change, equity, social, racial, income equity, etc., and being critical as well as embracing of data and new technologies. And so the conversation is quite broad, even as we look at a wall section, for example. And that is really thanks to Lola Benalon and her kind of redirecting of the technology sequence. So to kind of really both understand skills of how we put things together today, to really sort of register this crucial time of crisis vis-a-vis the environment, but also in addition to skills, kind of expanding to finding new ways to intervene, the envelope, structure, how things are assembled, and finding ways to assemble them in new way, always with these larger issues and question on our minds. And again, New York is really central to that exploration, where we can go and see buildings under construction and sort of critique the excess of concrete and other modes of construction, as well as learn about them at the same time. For the history theory sequence, which is led by Reinhold Martin, and this is his new book, Knowledge Worlds. The history theory sequence has been at the heart of sort of decentering the field and the architecture sort of conversations in particular, both as a result of, both from the perspective, for example, of race, such as with the conversation around race and modern architecture, which was launched by Professor Mabel Wilson a few years ago, and is a result of a book that I hope she'll be speaking of tonight, or other faculties such as Atea Korakiwala, who's an assistant professor and is kind of rethinking issues of ecology and infrastructure in South Asia, and a very strong integration between our really leading PhD program in history theory led by Felicity Scott, who is here on the right, and with figures such as Lucia Ale, who'll be hosting a conversation this Friday on concrete. So kind of incredibly vibrant sort of faculty and also sort of conversation around history theory, which is kind of opening up, globalizing, questioning, decentering, maybe decolonizing, although this is a kind of a big feat, to again sort of engage with Avery Library, which is still the heart of the school. We sit on top of Avery Library, one of the probably the biggest architecture school in the world, and certainly one of the most beautiful ones. And we are also, as a kind of community, producing new knowledge in conversation with the books in Avery to kind of change change the conversation and move it laterally and in different ways. If you're interested if you're interested in some of the recent publications, you can check out Columbia Books on Architecture and the City, or the school's kind of publication arm and what they've produced recently. The visual studies sequence is led by Laura Kurgan, who also leads, as I mentioned, the Center for Spatial Research, and is really building on the legacy of the school's engagement with drawing, with visualization, with technology, but in completely sort of new ways. You start, really in the computer in 3D, and then you kind of learn to draw in 2D from there. Incredibly sort of sophisticated production, both in the first two courses of the advanced drawing representation. This is the project in AD Art 2 last year, which kind of found ways to change, to already reimagine the virtual platform we found ourselves sort of exchanging through. And the visual studies extends from really questions of modeling, measuring data, but also engages, as I mentioned earlier, in relationship, in kind of rethinking the relationship between the virtual and the natural world, emphasis on video, on new kind of media, new ways to present work, to tell stories, and to sort of to expand what we call architectural representation. And then professional practice, which really extends beyond the class itself to constructing constructing practice and engaged forms of practice, which was Juan Herreros's kind of research here at the school. And practice is really at the center of both questioning practice, both our faculty's work as well as our student. This is the Latin GSAP recent conversation on the question of agency, to the possibility that being in New York, we can visit offices, different kinds of offices around the city. We have a new career service director who is leading incredible conversations, from negotiation to opening up career services to new forms of practice across scales, and really bringing kind of practices both in the school, but also kind of connecting with practices around the world, and supporting our students through learning how to put portfolios together, learning how to engage with graphic design, etc. And if you're interested in some of the kind of expanded practices we've been supporting, you can hear some of the podcasts of the Incubator, which is the award that is given our recent alumni, some of our recent alumni, to expand modes of practice, modes of engaged practice in the world. We've also launched over the years and increased all school interdisciplinary courses, and in the spirit of kind of bringing us together, are launching more this next fall. This was last fall, Justin Moore's class on difference and design, which was an incredible conversation on sorry, I moved, which was an incredible conversation on how the built environment is shaped by difference, by design, and brought together students from GSAP with students from Tuskegee University. And these kinds of collaborations and partnerships are something that we want to continue. An all-school course on climate, technology, and society, led by Reinhold Martin, which hopefully will continue as well. And then new classes such as this one on tourism, tropicalization, and architecture, which will be in conjunction with Howard University next fall, or building the engine, a collaborator of Justin. Will be here. Fatou Dieye will be looking at new forms of construction in different places in Africa next fall, in cities in Africa next fall as well. And so the design studios are really the place where all these things also come together and where you as students integrate them across this issue of, or this question of scale, from the scale of architecture and the city. Always a conversation between the design studio in Avery and the city beyond, beyond the walls of Avery and beyond the campus. As I mentioned, this is the core led by Hilary Sample and Anna Pujaner, who leads Core 1, and Erica Getz, who leads Core 2, an all-star, all-power girls team that is just, you know, has really transformed the core sequence in an amazing way, women, I should say. Anna is both a practitioner, Anna Pujaner, and a scholar, and her work on kitchenless city kind of infiltrates her thinking of Core 1, and with a team of great emerging faculty who are regularly kind of awarded and create an incredibly collaborative team to think about these issues. So Core 1 really starts with reimagining Broadway and a very anchored sort of design in the city. And, you know, kind of bringing the city to the space of Avery, making models coming together, and sort of imagining interventions that could be done in Broadway through your design studio. In Core 2, you will focus on the school. Erica Getz is kind of really leading that studio. So Core 2, rethinking a school in the city, and always bringing sort of practitioners from the city to kind of meet with our students. So reviews are really a great moment to intersect with professionals from both around the world and New York. Housing, led by Hilary Santo, as I mentioned, and her own work in housing in Mexico City is something that has sort of informed the studio, and a lot of our faculty are also experts in housing. And I mentioned the conversation between the housing lab and the kind of research and the curriculum sort of are really increasingly coming together. So you're not just focused on the work that you're doing in studio, but also in conversation with the school around these issues of housing. And again, this translates into your own work and questions of like the role of housing in creating difference and building difference, as opposed to bringing people together, from the material scale and issues of construction to thinking about how do we think about and design housing that addresses the environment in better ways. And the environment in the large sense of a very sort of both small scale and large scale is really the question that you will deal with in the 3 last semester of Advanced Studios. First, Advanced 4 Studio, led by Ziad Jamaluddin, who is doing incredible work on rethinking the mosque and its representation in architecture. Again, sort of award-winning studios across the Advanced Studios. This is a studio prize was won by Fu Huang studio last year. And here you see, I hope if you watch the other open house video, you can see some of our spaces. But I'm just showing, you know, how students work. And then kind of growing in scale from, and in sort of context from looking at you know, regions or the rural areas around New York, to thinking about how we build in a more environmentally sustainable way, and again bringing all of these issues to studio. So not divorcing design and the act of design from the act of thinking critically, but rather bringing all of these things together, such as in Advanced Studio, led by Mario Gooden, who has really centered issues of rethinking or unlearning, let's say, including unlearning whiteness as part of the conversations that are going on right now. And here is some of the work of our faculty, both urban, but also natural, both infrastructural and architectural, both almost at the scale of rethinking living and the furniture, and to kind of bringing a space of imagination to making at the school. The spring studio and Advanced Studio is also the spring where you engage with other places and cultures and contexts through travel, always both expanding imagination as well as expanding your critical ability to situate your own work and then bring it and back to studio and work through it with your colleagues, peers, faculty, practitioners, etc. Increasingly, we have joint studios also between the programs. So even if you're in architecture, you can take a joint studio with historic preservation, with the real estate program, or with urban planning in advanced 4. This interdisciplinarity also extends to the summer workshops. This year, with the lack of travel opportunity, we are really focusing on New York and the region around kind of metropolitan region with incredible summer workshops, which you can look up online. And all of this is, as I mentioned earlier, with this kind of feedback loop of research practice and positioning your own work through, we often have the question, what about thesis? Well, your entire time at GSAPP is the kind of building of a trajectory, the building of a thesis, which really comes together in your portfolio at the end of both the AAD and the M.Arch programs, and weaves together writing, drawing, thinking, etc., in a very personal way. And it comes together for the larger audience, both through the end of year show, which takes over the entire school, but which you can also now see virtually since we have now hybridized the two. This summer, hopefully we will be building, or we are building a pavilion that was inspired by a charrette by our students. And this will replace the current pavilion, which I call the ugly tent, in which students are coming together right now and will continue to do so this summer. And this is our space, which I hope you will be joining. And now turning it over to questions from the audience and responses and engagement with our faculty. Thank you. Sorry for the interruptions. This is life. So, and work, or whatever boundary is left. All right. Thanks, Justin. Yes, for absolutely, the design commission, which Justin chaired for a long time. Or are you still involved with? You're still involved with the design commission? No.
No, no longer. I'm formally left, but Lori Hawkinson is still the architect member of the design commission. So coming to Columbia is a great way to make links with New York City, with government, for those of you that are interested in kind of the public and all the roles that designers have in doing that work. So that's a great example of the school really connecting and contributing to its city, which is sort of your second educator become.
Thank you, Justin. And now is the time to really connect with city work and city projects, as we are hopeful of more kind of public work and infrastructural work might happen I will stop speaking and make sure there is enough time for questions.
We're receiving a few questions that are being sent directly to the administrators. I just want to make sure that I have the right settings here, and I do. I'm just going to go ahead and read the first question that came in just to me, so that I don't have to, so that we don't retype it. Question from Dhruva. Hello, what will be the format of the summer for the MS-AAD program for international students?
So I will answer a little bit, and I will turn it over to Andres Haki. In this summer, right now, we are in what we call hybrid mode, which is that studios are accessible. There is some in person and some virtual. And this summer will continue to be hybrid with increasingly in-person studio, but seminars and large lectures being virtual. If you are an international student, if you can be here, that's great. If you cannot be here, you can remain remote. Andres, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would only add that, well, tomorrow we'll be talking more in detail about the summer and the AAD program, but I think it's a very unique moment. For the first time, there's going to be an overlapping between the graduating AAD class and the coming AAD class. So that means that the summer will be quite exciting because we will have 18 studios. We're also working with the notion of entangled studios, looking at the way design is being part of the defiance that we're facing now and the way that basically architectural design practices are being reinvented. So we're looking at that and we're doubling the studios into also symposiums. So I think it's going to be a very, very exciting moment in which basically we will focus on the, let's say, intersectionality of practices, of design practices, and also the way that they contain forms of activism. But tomorrow we can probably get into much more detail.
Right, and again, I think if you, we will be also sharing more about both the summer and the fall, following President Bollinger's message about fall instruction. The goal, as in his letter, is really to be in person, providing health guidelines, etc. But we're really kind of moving towards that goal at this moment. So there's a question about from Lula Chu. What are some research opportunities for the students to engage? For example, working along with faculty's expertise. So I thought maybe Laura Kerrigan and Reinhold Martin might want to speak to the relationship between research and having students work with you in your centers.
Sure. I can start. So I run the Center for Spatial Research, and we're mostly a grant funded center, and we have a number of TAs each semester who are part of the research, either the research activities of the center or the teaching. They are TAs with the courses that are being run by the center. And in general, we engage in critical cartography and data visualization and things that are sort of, somewhat extracurricular to architecture per se, but they're the issues that bring together and make bridges between architecture, planning, preservation, and real estate. So the projects that we engage in the center are very transcalar, to use Andres Hake's word, and also very multimedia, and engage students in all kinds of research topics. Can I answer one more question that I noticed in the chat before Reinhold?
Yeah, of course, Laura.
Yeah, someone asked about, one thing I've always noticed and enjoyed the students' work is the way that they represent projects and ideas, and I think they are really unique. I wanted to know why this is so important, because it's actually important to the Center for Spatial Research, and one of the tenets of the school is data and design, one of the three things you'll see on the website, but I can answer that question as the director of the visual studies sequence. And, ever since Columbia was one of the first schools to introduce the paperless studios in the 90s, now 30 years ago, it's been a commitment of the school to stay at the forefront of technology, and not for the mere excitement of, what it is to introduce new tools, but to say that we think, and we think with our tools, and our tools actually, architects don't build, they draw things. And so we like to introduce new tools in ways that ask architects to reflect on why they use the tools that they use. And there's a real focus on that in ADR 1 and ADR 2, the core classes of the visual studies sequence. And we focus on how to draw buildings in the first part of that sequence, and then how to really even design tools in the second half of that sequence. So we keep it really at the forefront, not only what we think with and build, but how we conceptualize and what tools we should use to build and actually unbuild our design concepts. So 2 questions in one.
Reinhold.
Yeah, I'll just be quick because there's so many questions. But yeah, the Beal Center, we also work with student researchers. They work in teams, and currently the team is they're really in many ways leading this branch of the research in curricular rethinking across the built environment that we call green reconstruction, that puts together the problems to do with climate and society around racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. So that you can see on the Beal Center website. There are also ways in which the students work as basically research assistants with individual history theory faculty, and also in the Visual Resource Center, VRC, are doing currently research, again, fairly independent research, student-led research on underrepresented visual, or basically recording and scanning and documenting underrepresented architects, traditions, and cultures in our history, kind of our archive. So I'll leave it there. There'll be more shortly. Yeah.
Thank you, Reinhold. And I should say, in the spirit of interdisciplinarity and making connections, the Beal Center, and under Reinhold's directorship and in collaboration with GSAP, had the amazing Public Works for Green New Deal joint studios last year, which is continuing now in urban design. And so these kind of connections is something that that are really crucial, and that many of our faculty, such as Reinhold, have been really supporting. So you can also look at that online as well. There's a few questions here on how is the school reimagining architecture, and I think Reinhold pointed to some of the kind of questioning and decentering happening in history theory, but I wanted to maybe turn it over to both Mario and Hilary. Mario, with both your kind of questionings of the discipline, but also questionings of modes of practice and your engagement with performance and kind of art productions, and your collaboration right now with Turquoise, and so how are we expanding both the discipline, but also how we practice it?
Yeah, thanks, Amal. Yes, particularly at this time, given our situation and being hybrid, the studio faculty have really been sort of rethinking pedagogy. But what has also come out of this time is much more collaborative work, and that collaborative work is happening across studios, but it's also happening interdisciplinarily. So between architects and artists, architects and performance artists, architects and people and scholars in other departments. So for example, in the advanced studios, this semester, we have the artist Amanda Williams, who's based in Chicago, who's co-teaching a studio with one of our PhD candidates, Ife Venable. Turquoise Dyson, who's an internationally recognized artist, who's co-teaching a studio with myself. And there are other examples, but these studios have also been able to have invited guests internationally that we perhaps would not have had the opportunity to bring to the school, but we can do this via Zoom. And so these guests are working as well in other disciplines, whether or not they are video or whether or not they're sort of filmmaking. And we've also found that working in this environment, this Zoom environment, we've also had to think about new modes of representation. And as we think about those new modes of representation, that's also given us the opportunity to engage filmmakers, to engage people who are working with video perhaps, and thinking about how that might impact and how that might inform the way that we think about representation in architecture.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hilary Sample, and I'm director of the core and also leading the housing studio. I think some of the ways that we've tried to reimagine the way the studio, specifically in housing, but across the core, has to do with our engagement in communities and also with the city. And so while we visit sites in Manhattan and in the Bronx, we're trying to work closely with different community groups. And so, for example, this past fall, we were working with a Bronx Documentary Center and the Melrose Community Garden. And so these are sort of introductions made, but the students were very active, and I think in actually doing volunteer work with the community garden. And so it's a really wonderful way to extend the studio and create a conversation. And for us to think about when we enter, to be very mindful of how we're working with the community and try to give opportunities to give back, not just that we're extracting information from a community. And at the same time, working at that scale, housing is looked across North America in general, but we're also working with New York City. So the core is really based in you gaining opportunities to look at the city very carefully. We're working with New York City's HPD, Housing Preservation and Development. So on one hand, we're really entrenched in a neighborhood, but we're also working with the city and this particular group that they come to the studio. They participated over the whole semester, participating in reviews, giving workshops, and they're actually writing design guidelines for the city. So we have a kind of insight into their way of working, and I think opportunities to push back a little bit on that. So this is a kind of exceptional, I think, way of working, and really reflective much more on how you work in practice.
There's a few questions here about kind of engaging with the real world and building, and I wanted to, following the prefab slide presentation, I wanted to both invite Galia Solomonov and what the work she's doing now with Lori Hawkinson with the kind of building of the pavilion, and her experience with kind of installations in general, and then also invite Lola Benalon to speak more about that as well, and the sort of desire to do more hands-on work.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you, Amal. So yes, one of the things we try to do is to both connect with you via teaching and connect with you via building. Building has different rules than teaching or thinking about architecture. And so one of the things we're doing with Lori Hawkinson this semester is we're building a pavilion between the building of Avery that you saw in the pictures and Fairweather, and that connects students with manufacturing process and making things. And we're very excited to do this. This is the second time we are building a pavilion at Columbia, and I hope that we continue that tradition with you, our incoming students.
Lola, would you like to add?
Yeah, so sorry, I thought that Lori is also with us on the meeting. So following what Galia is describing, really at the Building Science and Technology sequence, we are really looking at different tools to actualize grand design. So how do we make our building visions a reality? So we have our core classes from environmental tools for assessment of course, climate and light and other environmental factors, to structures and facades and integrated systems, both in the building scale and in the urban scale. And that is followed with a wide variety of electives that also test and examine critically these tools of technology. So in a way, connecting the theoretical framework to the how you actualize your design in practice. So for instance, we have an elective that you go to different, you have 4 to 5, I think, tours or visits in waste facilities around the city to see, you know, the behind the scenes of how buildings operate. So yeah, I hope this answers.
Thank you, Lola. I wanted to, there's a few questions here, both on students who don't have a background in architecture and how to best prepare. And so I wanted to invite both, not both, Anna Pujaner to say a few words about Core 1, but also Jerome and Amina, if you can also jump in as teachers in Core 1. If you don't have a background, it's great. If you do have a background, it's great. We love both and both have their strength. Anna, would you like to say a few things?
Yes, thank you, Amal. Yeah, we do understand that having different backgrounds is actually a very positive and rich things to have in the school. We encourage enormously to exchange the knowledge that we all have, and we think that that's extremely productive. So it's don't consider yourself out of the scope if you have not an architectural background, but totally the opposite. You're going to be engaged in the conversation and exchange enormously what you have learned previously. And also consider that all the courses are deeply coordinated. That doesn't mean that we teach the same, but actually that everything that is taught is related to each of the other courses. And in particular, Core 1 is deeply coordinated with ADR 1, Architectural Drawing and Representation, the first semester. And we do that in order to make sure that those that do have a the lack of an architectural background can very fast engage with architectural tools in a very easy manner. Also, there were a lot of questions about lottery. Core 1 doesn't have a lottery to select professors, but as Jerome and Amina can also expand on that, we are a very bonded professors team, and that means that we do meet very often between groups and among groups. We do exchange reviews. So you're going to have an assigned Core 1 professor, but that doesn't mean that that's the only professor that you're going to meet. You're going to receive review, feedback, and you can engage conversations with all of us. Jerome, Amina, do you want to expand on that?
Hi, everyone. Sure, I think Amina stepped out. Yes, Core 1 is so great because you saw the strip of Broadway animation where in a way there's this kind of collective syllabus and collective project, but then each instructor, each professor then has their own take. So it's very united, like Anna was saying, but also you get a kind of specific position within the group of 7 or 8 instructors there. So it's kind of the perfect mix. And I would also say really to bring an open mind and a readiness to collaborate and be imaginative and fearless is the best advice. I really, by week 4, you can't really tell the students who have an architecture background from the students who don't. It's really amazing because it's this entirely new experience, and the curriculum is structured so much to integrate you and challenge your methods regardless.
I would just add to what Anna and Jerome are saying. It's a great mix at GSAP between background and non-background in architecture. And I think the ambition of Core 1 especially is to foster that cross-pollination where if you have a background in whatever field, you bring value. It's not that this notion that you need to catch up, but the ideas of your own expertise and life experience actually add richness to the mix of students. And so a lot of times it's translating ideas into substance, into form, and that process is really rich. So I think conventions are something that is a learning curve and can be taught, but that community, that studio culture, even online, we're finding is really a value to have every different background. And like Jerome was saying, by the end of first year, it's very hard to tell where your background was.
And let me add to that, that this also interdisciplinary approach is facilitated by the fact that we look to the city, we look to our close context. So we do qualitative and quantitative research, and we talk about what means public space nowadays, understanding that public space is not the space in between buildings, but rather something much more complex that deals with a territory that engage with environmental issues, economical issues, political issues. So that's why an interdisciplinary approach is extremely desirable, and we understand it as a value.
Thank you, Anna, Amina, and Jerome. A few things that I saw in the chat. One, I think on the question of travel, we have the longest standing kind of travel program called the Kinney Fellowship Program, which supports extensive travel in the advanced studios. And as soon as we can resume, we will and be able to do that. I will say that we do that not as an end in itself, but as this kind of continuing of developing critical ways to think about specific places and people, and how as architects do we land in the place, or should we land in the place. And so I think this kind of critical dimension is really central to quote unquote travel and our engagement with still global condition we exist in. There are a few questions about your position and how you develop your position. Again, as an architect, we work within constraints, and we are often given a brief. So how you articulate your own position, whether you are invited to take a tech class or be in a studio or have 18 studios, offered in the last year, you have to carve your own position. Nothing is given. And so in every step of the way in your education, there's a moment to claim your place and your voice. There is a question about connections beyond the school. And I wanted to maybe enlist Justin. We collaborate quite a bit with institutions. We are really part of the cultural landscape, and that's why we are such an important platform, whether it's with MoMA or NOMA, but maybe Justin can say a few words about that.
Sure. Yeah, this is a great question, and it's great that you have kind of the foresight to know that there's life after GSAP. And one thing I could say is that you're, of course, signing up for an educational experience, but you're also signing up for exposure and access to networks. And Columbia really does have that, I think, in spades in many ways, especially with our networks here in New York. So in New York, we have a robust design community. So there's the AIA, NOMA, which is a National Organization of Minority Architects that work closely together, the Architectural League, the Design Trust, Urban Design Forum. There's a great community for you to connect with while you're here. Many of the people in these organizations, running these organizations, are Columbia affiliated in some form, either as alumni and also in our faculty as well. So there'll be ample opportunities for you to get connected and involved. There are so many great events at Columbia, it's kind of hard to kind of carve off the time to go to other people's events. So you kind of don't need to. You'll see there's a lot of overlap, but it is great for networking. Something else that I'll mention on this topic, and something I would underline with what Amal was presenting, with the idea of you, over the course of your education, really defining your path, your interest, and sort of your way of thinking about practice, is that you'll have a great network of people, a diverse network of people in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their interests, that you'll be able to navigate and find while you're in the school. And making those connections with people will be able to sort of match make and sort of help you find your way to what your disciplinary future may be, whether it's you're an architect that wants to do fashion, or you're an architect that wants to work with artists, or you want to do social justice work, or if you want to really understand technology and data. There really is a robust network both at the school, but also in the kind of ecology, let's call it, of New York City that you'll be able to connect with.
Thank you, Justin. And you can also look up the Dark Matter University, Justin's own institute, kind of alternate institution, which is amazing and something we want to support and be part of as well. And so maybe, I know we have only, well, we've passed our time, but I'll take a few more minutes to invite Juan, Andres, and Ziad to say a few words of why GSAP, why are we different, or how are we the same, or why you're here with us as faculty. Maybe that's the best way to answer. Juan, do you want to start?
Okay, it's my pleasure. Welcome everyone for this new year at GSAP. I think that GSAP is deeply aware that architecture is a discipline in transformation, is permanently in transformation, all we know. But in these times, this is going super fast and is becoming also complicated because many new equations are on the table. And I think that what is really serious in the GSAP character is how to consider engagement and critical thinking part of this exploration. All we are together looking at these new ways of being architect today, and very especially to the role of young practitioners that is basically informing the experimental character of the school. So perhaps the way GSAP is experimental is a little bit different than other schools. It's experimental in terms of working with the unknown, but doing it as a big group of people trying to explore these new ways of being architect. As a detail, I'd like to mention the role of the young faculty, young practitioners, and young guests to all our serious lectures. No? How you will have contact, of course, with very experienced faculty and with very experienced architects coming to give lectures to the school, but also many people that GSAP tries to discover and to hire first than others just to give this radiography about what's happening, who is doing, who is trying to do different, and many of the guests will be young practitioners that perhaps can be a good model about what can you be doing in a few years. No? So I think that is part of the DNA of the school.
Ziad?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for all these interesting questions. Maybe I'm gonna try to answer that last question, maybe built on other questions that have been posed earlier. Maybe going back to Hilary's description on the relationship of the school and the studios to the communities around them, I would like to add also that in Advanced 4 Studio, which I coordinate, we expand that relationship to the larger communities in upstate New York, where we're dealing with several minority groups and Native American tribes that are actually collaborating with the current studios now being given in the spring. So there is this interest, I feel like, so what is my role in the school? I feel there's this interest today to expand the discipline beyond kind of the secularization that kind of informed the history of architecture until this moment, and opening up maybe a space to look at religious communities and religious practices, spatial practices, rituals, and their influence on the built environment. And maybe another question there that kind of builds on that is, in my studios, and I know in many other studios, the travel often kind of touches on these issues. I often go back to the same place, same region in North Africa, trying also to build a relationship with the local community there, with local experts and architects, and not only kind of come one at once, kind of do some study and drop some design ideas. So this idea of engagement with the global community in a much more substantial and sustainable way.
Thank you, Ziad. Andres, would you like to add a few words?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important question that we have to keep discussing and discussing. I think the first difference, I think that, or something that is very unique of GSAP, and that also makes me very excited of being part of it, is that there's no instruction. this is really a very diverse ecosystem where everything's discussed, where basically we keep discussing with ourselves, we keep discussing faculty, students, visitors. Nothing is fixed, and we understand how critical architecture is and how important it is to find ways to engage with diversity and with difference and disputes and different ways of operating in the same ground. And the second, I think that is crucial is that we believe in this huge difference and kind of keeping ourselves discussing all the time. I think there's a shared belief that architecture counts, that is a fundamental player in the making of societies, that it's a fundamental, a momentous player in all the defiance that we're facing. And for me, that's crucial. Design plays a key role in everything that we see at the front page of newspapers. And what we are engaged with is basically making the best of this power and this capacity, and also operating responsibly within this kind of agency. That's the way I would explain it.
Thanks, Andres. So I think it's time. I know there are many other questions. We will email some answers and make sure that you are sort of you have as much information as you would like at this moment. I want to thank everyone on the call. Invite, if there's last comments, please jump in. But otherwise, I think this is a really incredible time at the school of kind of coming together and really pushing in a new sort of uncharted territories everywhere. And it's incredibly exciting and vibrant, and it feels real, and it feels like it could matter. So I want to thank the faculty, and again, thank all of you for joining, and hopefully I will see you in person physically, and we will kind of take what is best of this moment of the Minecraft Avery, and what is best of being back together in an incredible campus, in an incredible city. So thank you all for your time this morning or evening, wherever you are.